This week, I remade a classic game from my childhood. And before we get into the video, you can go play it right now for free in your browser. There's a link at the top of the description. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Tanks was a part of Wii Play, which was a collection of minigames that was strategically bundled with an extra Wii controller. So when parents wanted to get an extra Wiimote, they were likely to spend a few extra bucks to get this bundle instead, which is how a lot of people ended up with Wii Play. Now, sadly, I don't have a Wii anymore. And since there's no way to play Wii games on your computer, my only option was to remake it myself. One issue is I don't really remember much about this game. While I did like it a lot, I was pretty young when I played, and I don't think my brother and I ever made it past level 20. So I jogged my memory by watching a playthrough, and I noted down a few important things. Some things I knew I would need were 3D models, an orthographic camera, sound effects, some kind of cursor and aiming system, and really great movement. I haven't made a 3D game in a while, so I wanted to start by hopping into Blender to make some models. I found a reference photo of a tank, and I did my best to make something similar. I can already hear you asking, and yes, I did barely pass a 3D modeling class in college. After the tank, I made a rocket, some different cubes, a cylinder, and this triangle that would decorate the scene. Now that I had models, I searched the web for textures. I actually found this texture atlas from the game, and I threw that in with a few other things I had to make myself. The last resource I needed to grab was audio. Now, the sound effects and music in this game are a huge rabbit hole that I honestly recommend you dive into. There's a great breakdown by this YouTuber called Scruffy that I highly recommend watching. But I knew that implementing all that was far outside the scope of this project, so I just grabbed a track of music and a bunch of sound effects, all from the original game. When it comes to engines, lately I've been using Unity for everything, and I actually planned on making this in Unreal Engine 5, just to see how that went. But I quickly ran into a ton of problems. Apparently the orthographic camera is bugged in UE5, and you just see a messed up wireframe. And after switching to Unreal Engine 4 and putting up with its awful UI, I just kept running into more problems. So I decided to return to Unity. Once I got my project set up, I wanted to start with visuals. I threw in all my blocks and I made a script that would randomly assign 1 to 4 wood textures to each of them, just so they felt evenly dispersed. Then I did my best to lay out a playable space. Normally, I would have waited a while before focusing on art, but for a project like this, I felt like it was pretty necessary to establish that I could reach that visual look, and it gave me a lot of motivation to move forward. Now I want to work on the player tank. I decided to use Unity's new input system, not necessarily because it was warranted, but because I'm trying to force myself to get used to building things with it. I got movement working fairly quickly, but was really struggling with some issues dealing with rotations. The issues seem to be from my Blender models, since Blender switches around some of the axes, but once I put them as a child to an empty game object, it cleared up most of my issues, and I ran into a few more rotation things when I was trying to get the turret to face the mouse cursor, but I eventually got everything sorted out and it worked really well. Now I wanted to implement the shooting system, so I made a rocket prefab and I chucked a particle system on the back of it to make smoke, and I fiddled around with the effect a little bit until I finally got something that matched the original smoke effect. And around the same time, I started implementing the aiming and cursor UI that's found in the original game. There were probably a lot of ways to do this, but what I came up with was I made 2D sprites that were angled at 45 degrees, that way they were looking straight at the camera, and I used a little bit of math to put them on a line between the turret position and the mouse position. I also added a trail render to the cursor, that way it made it feel a lot like the original Wii cursor. Now I need to get an enemy in the game, and that was actually pretty easy. I just took the player tank model and I changed the colors to match the brown tank from the original game. I could have implemented more enemy types, but I figured one was enough for what I was trying to accomplish. And I grabbed an explosion effect from the asset store and I threw it on the tank, as well as a death marker that would spawn on the ground after the explosion. I also took some time here to lay out the rest of the level. It isn't an exact copy, but it's similar to a recurring level that's from the original game. And I need to add an AI to the enemy tanks. I say the quotes because it's really not an AI. I've made a system where you could lay out a patrol path that the tank would follow, and then if they spot the player, they will chase it, and then if the player gets too far, they'll return back to their patrol path. The main issue is they don't have any pathfinding, and I just really didn't want to bother implementing it, so ignore the fact that they can get stuck on walls. An important feature I need to add was the tread marks for the tanks. I did this by having 2 points on the back of each tank, and every 0.05 seconds or so of driving, 2 new sprites will spawn. And anyone who knows anything about performance will tell you that spawning something new every 0.05 seconds is horrible performance. And I agree. But for the scope of this game, I felt like it was fine, and I eventually switched to an object pooler, so I spawn about 500 of them, and then deactivate them before you even start playing, which makes it a little bit less likely that you'd run into performance issues, but if you play long enough, you probably will. Now the game was really starting to shape up, so I had to make some UI. I remade this background image as well as some other banners and little things. It was pretty simple shape, so I handled it easily, In Unity, I put all my UI into a separate scene, and then I loaded the gameplay scene additively. You may not have even known that you could do that, and it may not have been the best thing to do in this scenario, but I mainly did it so that I could load and reload the main gameplay scene behind this tank background without the user noticing. But as far as screens, I just made a mission debrief screen that leads into gameplay, and then a win and lose screen, and then I threw together a pretty simple menu with just a play and YouTube button. The last thing I needed to add was audio. Now, I previously mentioned the audio in this game was insane, and I had no chance of being able to replicate it, so I just tried to match as many of the sound effects as possible. So I added sounds for most of the gameplay elements, and then the level countdowns and ending sounds, as well as one music track. So altogether, this is what it looks and sounds like. Now, this is not a one-to-one replica of the original. It was never going to be, but I'm pretty proud of what I made. You should really go check it out if you're interested. Like I said, it's at the top of the description. I have a bunch more videos coming, so please subscribe if you don't want to miss them. If you want to talk to me about games or anything else, you can join my Discord or follow me on Twitter. And I really appreciate you watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. And let me know if there's something you want to see me do. Alright,